Welcome to the Code to Catch Up podcast. My name is Jamie Jones. This episode, I'm going to be talking about the latest Laravel release. That's Laravel 5.5. Now, if you're not too sure what Laravel is, it is a PHP framework, and it is a brilliant framework. Even in regards to any other framework out there for different languages, it really is awesome. Now, if you haven't checked it out before, I highly recommend checking it out and evaluating, especially if you are writing in PHP and using some other framework or you haven't used a framework before. It's the one to definitely check out, not just because of all the features and the productivity you get from it, but also the ecosystem around it. So that is the supporting services all around it, like just in general. So for hosting, for learning, for packages, things like that. It's unrivaled. It's doing super well. It's pretty awesome. So getting into the release notes here, I'm just going to be running through the releases page on laravel.com. And this is a pretty important release, and this is why I really want to talk about it, is because it's a long-term support release. And this is something that Laravel's been doing for a little while now. And it's really nice to see. It just means you can rely on basically this particular version, being that it will be supported for a fairly long term. So getting on with the initial notes here. So Laravel 5.5 continues the improvements made in Laravel 5.4 by adding package auto detection, API resources transformations, auto registration of console commands, queue job chaining, queue job rate limiting, time-based job attempts, renderable mailables, renderable and reportable exceptions, more consistent exception handling database, testing improvements, simpler custom validation rules, React front-end presets, route view and route redirect methods, locks for the memcached and Redis cache drivers, on-demand notifications, headless Chrome support in Dusk, convenient blade shortcuts, improved trusted proxy support, and more. So you can see it's quite a massive release, and it's really good to see that all this came into a long-term support release as well. And it just keeps getting even better. So in addition, Laravel 5.5 coincides with the release of Laravel Horizon, a beautiful new queue dashboard and configuration system for your Redis-based Laravel queues. Now, if you work with queues at all, having a dashboard for the configuration, etc. around it is super, super handy, and Laravel Horizon is quite nice. I haven't really got a chance to go in and dive into it. But reading around, looking at and having a look in the underlying internals, it's been pretty awesome. So I'm really glad to see that. So I'll touch on that here. I'm basically just running through these notes on the Laravel releases page. So Laravel Horizon provides a beautiful dashboard and code-driven configuration for your Laravel-powered Redis queues. Horizon allows you to easily monitor key metrics of your queue system, such as job throughput, runtime, and job failures. All of your worker configuration is stored in a single, simple configuration file, allowing your configuration to stay in source control where your entire team can collaborate. Definitely check out their documentation. If you are working or doing anything with queues, which is quite common these days, you really need to check out Horizon if you're using Laravel. I think that's just a no-brainer to make sure you're using that in your daily workflow and make sure your team's up to date with that. Next up is package discovery. So in previous versions of Laravel, installing a package typically required several additional steps, such as adding the service provider to your app configuration file and registering any relevant facades. However, beginning with Laravel 5.5, Laravel can automatically detect and register service providers and facades for you. So this is really nice. So I kind of like the auto-loading experience that I've got from Rails development, and not having to worry about these packages having to be manually putting them in there really just saves you a lot of time and a lot of headaches. So it's quite nice there. Next thing is API resources. Now this one I think is a great addition, and I'm not too sure if there was an existing package for this, but it's good to see that it's there. So when building an API, you may need a transformation layer that sits between your eloquent models and the JSON responses that are actually returned to your application's users. Laravel's resource classes allow you to expressively and easily transform your models and model collections into JSON. A resource class represents a single model that needs to be transformed into a JSON structure. For example, here is a simple user class, and they go through a very, very straightforward user class and how that works. And of course, they're saying this is only the most basic example of an API resource, and Laravel provides a variety of methods when you're doing that. Now, this example is very straightforward, so if you're looking to get into this and kind of get a rundown, this will work really, really well for you, and it's kind of like the bare minimum of what you would most possibly need for a simple response. Now, of course, your responses may differ, but if you are following a very simple RESTful response structure, you should be pretty close to that, in my opinion. But basically, having this layer just eliminates you having to do a lot of manual stuff. And if you are coming from the Rails side, this is very much like what are things called active model serializers. And it basically is really just a layer in between your database and the controller or the response that's being sent. And it's just transforming that data. And it's always good to have something in there in between instead of trying to do that at your control level, etc. So nice to see that's included there. Next up is console command auto registration. I know some people have found this a bit annoying and it's tripped some people up in the past. So when creating new console commands, you no longer are required to manually list them in the $commands property of your console kernel. Instead, a new load method is called from the commands method of your kernel, which will scan the given directory for any console commands and register them automatically. Great. So this basically just stops some headaches where I know some people have thought they've got it in the right and it's just been wrong and they're trying to figure out what's going on. So it's really nice to see that. It's just basically taking those headaches away. Next one, which I think is pretty awesome, is the new front-end presets. So while the basic view scaffolding is still included in Laravel 5.5, several new front-end preset options are now available. So in a fresh application, you can swap view scaffolding for React scaffolding using the preset command. Now, I believe that you can also have Bootstrap. I'm sure I read this on Laravel News, but you can also, in the presets, so you do PHP artisan preset and then what you want. So you've got like none, you don't want any, you use Vue, you can use React, and I'm pretty sure you can use Bootstrap. So that's nice to see there. So that's really handy. It basically just allows you to get ready, get everything up and running for a specific front end. And I think that's very relevant to today and going on with the future. So it's nice to see they've got that in place. So the next things I'm going to talk about is related to the queuing system. So queued job chaining. So job chaining allows you to specify a list of queued jobs that should be run in sequence. If one job in the sequence fails, the rest of the jobs will not be run. To execute a queued job chain, you may use the with chain method on any of your dispatchable jobs. So really nice to see there that the idea is basically if you want to run a series of queued jobs, but you want to make sure that it doesn't try and execute if something has failed previously, this is kind of a nice command to help you with that. The next one, which I think is awesome and is really necessary, which is queued job rate limiting. So if your application interacts with Redis, you may now throttle your queued jobs by time or concurrency. This feature can be of assistance when your queued jobs are interacting with APIs that are also rate limited. For example, you may throttle a given type of job to only run 10 times every 60 seconds. Alternatively, you may specify the maximum number of workers that may simultaneously process a given job. This can be helpful when a queue job is modifying a resource that should only be modified by one job at a time. For example, we may limit jobs of a given type to only be processed by one worker at a time. So there's two really, really important points with this, and this is why I think this is really necessary. So the first one is the rate limiting with external APIs, and it's pretty common now that we're integrating with various APIs, and they need to put in rate limiting. And a lot of API providers do put rate limits in place. So Intercom, for example, is one. And I've had this issue quite a lot where I thought I was going to be under the rate limit and it's not, so I have to go and try and tweak things. And this just makes it really simple. The next one is about the resources, so modifying a resource. This can be really problematic because you don't want to update the database at the same time and then you get something out of sync. Or you might be updating the one thing and next thing it doesn't work and can cause some headaches. So it's really nice that is in place there, because it really can be one of these bugs where you're like, how did this happen? What's going on? And you'll be just stuck trying to debug it for quite a while. And it can also just cause havoc on your database, which you really need to make sure that you keep your data integrity at the highest level. Is really important. So the next bit is time-based job attempts. As an alternative to defining how many times a job may be attempted before it fails, you may now define a time at which the job should time out. This allows a job to be attempted any number of times within a given time frame. So very, very simple there. I think the whole queuing updates are pretty good. Like, I'd even like to see this just in a single release. Like, besides being accompanied by all these other changes, it's really, really nice to see. And you really should be trying to push off a lot of tasks to queues if you can. It can reduce some friction in your application, so it's nice there. The next up is validation. So validation rule objects. So validation rule objects provide a new, compact way of adding custom validation rules to your application. In previous versions of Laravel, the validator extend method was used to add custom validation rules via closures. However, this can grow cumbersome. In Laravel 5.5, a new make rule artisan command will generate a new validation rule in the app rules directory. So very, very straightforward. It's just PHP artisan make :rule, and then you give whatever validation name you want. So a rule object only has two methods: passes and message. The passes method should receive the attribute value and name and should return true or false. This is purely a Boolean response, depending on whether the attribute value is valid or not. The message method should return the validation error message that should be used when validation fails. A nice example with that one there. It's quite a nice API. I'm actually pretty surprised on how well this API is done, because validations can get tricky, but how this API is done is quite nice. I quite like how they've set that up. Once the rule has been defined, you may use it by simply passing an instance of the rule object with your other validation rules. So it's very simple. Once you've got it in there, you just use that validation at the top of your file with all your other use if you have them in there, and then basically you just pass them through to your validate method. Next one, which this one I haven't really had a look into too much. It's quite new to me, but trusted proxy integration. So when running applications behind a load balancer that terminates TLS SSL certificates, you may notice your application sometimes does not generate HTTPS links. Typically, this is because your application is being forwarded traffic from your load balancer on port 80 and does not know it should generate secure links. To solve this, many Laravel users installed the Trusted Proxies package by Chris Fideo. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. Sorry, Chris, if I'm not. Since this is such a common use case, Chris's package now ships with Laravel 5.5 by default. That is awesome. A new middleware is included in the Laravel 5.5 application by default. Now, this middleware allows you to quickly customize your proxies that should be trusted by your application. Now, there's an example there. I highly recommend checking that one out in that section. And it just shows you how that's going to work. And basically, it's just setting up a bunch of forwarders. From what I can see in the example, it looks like an Nginx version that they're using in the demo. Seems to work pretty well. I think it's a simple kind of bit of configuration there. So on-demand notifications. Sometimes you may need to send a notification to someone who is not stored as a user of your application. Using the new notification route method, you may specify ad hoc notification routing information before sending the notification. So that's pretty. I think that's pretty interesting to see that's being included. For me, I haven't really seen too many use cases for that, but you may have or you might. So this could be a really great feature for you. The next one, which I think is really, really important, is renderable mailable. So mailables can now be returned directly from routes, allowing you to quickly preview your mailables designs in the browser. Now, I find this tremendously helpful when working with kind of like mailables or emails. It's a great little feature. It doesn't seem like much, but it is very, very handy. The next thing is renderable and reportable exceptions. So in previous versions of Laravel, you may have had to resort to type checking in your exception handler in order to render a custom response for a given exception. For instance, you may have written code like this in their example, and it's a very straightforward exception kind of class, just using a public render function. And basically, you're checking the instance of the exception and then returning a response. Otherwise, you just basically return the parent render. And it's a little bit annoying. So basically in 5.5, you've now got a report and render function, and that just handles everything. Like, you don't have to really worry about trying to do these instance of, which can get quite messy depending on how you're setting up your exception capture layer. So it's nice to see there. And then following on with that, there is request validation, which is awesome. I really love this. This is something new to me about having validation in the request. and it's just really, really nice. I think it's a good thing to have. It saves you from having to hit the model or things like that, or hit the database. It's really great. So basically, the request object now provides a validate method, allowing you to quickly validate an incoming request from a route closure or controller. And they've got a pretty straightforward example. I think it's awesome. It's clean. It's something that you can easily put in. I really love how that's done. So next up is consistent exception handling. So validation exception handling is now consistent throughout the framework. Previously, there were multiple locations in the framework that required customization to change the default format for JSON validation error responses. In addition, the default format for JSON validation responses in Laravel 5.5 now adheres to the following convention. Now, of course, you really got to check this out because there are a lot of code examples in this, but the responses are nice. So they're very well laid out. It's been well thought through. And the convention is great. So basically, you got a message key and value. Then you got an errors key, which takes a hash of errors. So for each field you might have in there. So they've got example field 1 and an array of errors, field 2 an array of errors. So it's a really nice format that they've set out there. All JSON validation error formatting can be controlled by defining a single method on your app exceptions handler class. And they've got a nice example there. Very straightforward. Great to see. It looks beautiful. So it's nice. I love it. Next up is cache locks. So the Redis and Memcache cache drivers now have support for obtaining and releasing atomic locks. So this provides a simple method of obtaining arbitrary locks without worrying about race conditions. So this is kind of a big deal. For example, before performing a task, you may wish to obtain a lock so no other processes attempt the same task that is already in progress. Now, these race conditions are really frustrating to debug, just like I talked about earlier with the queue system. Really, really nice to have something like that in here. It just basically reduces the possible pain you're going to have when you're developing your application with these things happening, because they do come up, and usually race conditions are hard to debug and hard to duplicate, and it's just nice that these things are there. So highly recommend reading that. There's a little bit more to it. It's not too much, but it's something you should definitely check out and make sure that you implement when you update to Laravel 5.5 where needed. Next one is some kind of front-end improvements, which Blade improvements. So programming a custom directory is sometimes more complex than necessary when defining simple custom conditional statements. For that reason, Blade now provides a Blade if method, which allows you to quickly define custom conditional directives using closures. For example, let's define a custom conditional here. So they're going over a very, very simple conditional using env, and basically that now can be defined easily in the templates. One of the biggest things I think is the auth. So being able to say like at auth or at guest, it just makes it a lot easier when you want to list something in a Blade template, and it feels more like it belongs in Blade. Like whereas previously, this is one of the things I didn't quite like with Blade ages ago in the past, and it just felt, I don't know, it just felt a little bit weird how it was set out. It just didn't quite feel right, and this kind of defines it in a way that feels like it belongs and it's not like a hack. Next up is new routing methods. So if you are defining a route that redirects to another URI, you may now use the route redirect method. This method provides a convenient shortcut so that you do not have to define a full route or controller for performing a simple redirect. This is great. This is something that Rails, I think, has had for quite a while. And it's just, it's a lot handier to have that and basically put that in there. The use cases for this is something like if you're migrating one route to a new route, and that way you don't have to keep around that controller action or that controller. So it's just nice to be able to basically pull that out and just keep it in the route. So it's nice there. If your route only needs to return a view, you may now use the route view method. Like the redirect method, this method provides a simple shortcut so that you do not have to define a full route or controller. The view method accepts a URI as its first argument and a view name as its second argument. In addition, you may provide an array of data to pass to the view as an optional third argument. Now, what I find this is really handy for, which I still do in Rails, and it's really frustrating to set up a controller method or action for this, and it's for like a static page, for example, and this is really nice to be able to just put that route in there. So this is a view I want to load. Here's some additional static data, and off you go. So that's really nice to see there as well. Next up is sticky database connections, and this is the last one in the news here. So the sticky option When configured read-write database connections, a new sticky configuration option is available. So the sticky option is an optional value that can be used to allow the immediate reading of records that have been written to the database during the current request cycle. If the sticky option is enabled and a write operation has been performed against the database during the current request cycle, any further read operations will use the write connection. So this ensures that data written during the request cycle can be immediately read back from the database during the same request. It is up to you to decide if this is desired behavior for your application. I can see this being quite useful instead of having to wait for that replication to happen so you can then read it again and stop getting some really annoying little issues when you're trying to read and it's like, it's not there yet. So that's really great to see. But that's essentially it for this episode. It's pretty exciting to see Laravel 5.5, the long-term release, come out. And, even as a Ruby on Rails developer, as my day-to-day job, Laravel really is a beautiful framework and they're doing amazing things with it, as well as the ecosystem. And as I've said in previous podcasts before, like if I was starting out in programming and I was doing PHP, Laravel would be the thing I'm going to latch onto. And even choosing a first programming language, I think I'd still go for PHP, which would lead me to Laravel because there's a lot of options out there. It's very much a hammer programming language. And Laravel, the framework, really does some amazing things and helps you write really nice maintainable code that will be very effective and performant. So it's great to see. I'd love to know your thoughts. What are your thoughts on Laravel 5.5? Have you already upgraded to it? Please let me know. Have you got any other frameworks or improvements that you would like to talk about? Let me know. You can send through a tweet to @CoderCatchup on Twitter, send through an email to codercatchup@gmail.com, or you can just find CoderCatchup in iTunes and you can leave a rating and review in there. It's up to you. Or you can even just leave a comment about the podcast there because I will read them there as well. But that's essentially it. Also, if you are not viewing this on YouTube, please check out the YouTube channel. There's a link on the codercatchup.com site. And the podcast goes there as well as other videos. If you're watching this on YouTube, check it out in iTunes. The podcast comes out there as well. That's essentially it. We'll catch the next one.